Okay, welcome everyone. Craig Kiger, Minnesota DNR Outreach, and today we're talking about probably one of my favorite upland birds to hunt, rough grouse. No, the pheasants. And there is not a prettier bird on the landscape, I think, than a rooster pheasant. So we brought in a expert from Pheasants Forever. Aaron Wilson is a farm biologist with PF, and he's going to talk about his passion for hunting late season birds, and we can get into equipment questions or what have you. So Aaron, would you tell the folks a little bit about you and what got you started doing this kind of work?
Yeah, so as Craig said, my name is Aaron Wilson. I'm Pheasants Forever farm bill biologist and chapter volunteer. My pheasant journey started somehow close to 20 years ago now. And I grew up in a family that fished a lot. We didn't do really any hunting. I kept pestering my dad that I really wanted to go hunting. And when I was probably somewhere in junior high, took hunter safety, got a gun that was handed down to me, and contacted a couple of my dad's cousins that did pheasant hunting and went out on my first pheasant hunt with them. And that we didn't shoot any birds, but we saw some birds, and that rush of just seeing birds flush and hearing them cackle got me hooked. And next couple of years we would go, one or two times a year. I grew up playing hockey, so that time of year is pretty busy. And then once I got to high school, I had a class for a biology class where we had to do a mission project or volunteer project. And I joined the local Pheasants Forever chapter. And we did a couple of tree plantings and native grass and flower plantings, and just really kind of got into the wildlife habitat management side of things. And that kind of focused my career path. Went to college I got a degree in aquatic biology and environmental science. Really was actually kind of headed towards more of the fisheries side of things, and hopped around from seasonal position to seasonal position. Decided to take a couple more classes in college to get a couple more qualifications for certain positions, and ended up getting hired at Pheasants Forever. Right about that same time, I got my dog, which is pictured there. He's a French Brittany. His name is Obi. And from that point on, pheasant hunting's kind of been my thing that I try to do as much as I can of every fall. For any of you that don't know what the Pheasants Forever, we're a grassroots nonprofit organization that really strives to implement conservation and habitat on the ground. Our mission statement is to conserve pheasants, quail, and other wildlife through habitat improvements, public access, education, and conservation advocacy. And then our vision is that current and future generations of hunters and conservationists are able to enjoy abundant populations of wild pheasants, quail, and other wildlife. Today, I'm here to chat with you about late season pheasant hunting. And to get started in that, kind of the first thing we might want to discuss is just, what is the season of pheasant hunting here in Minnesota? Statewide, we're looking at October 12th. So the season just started a little over a week ago, and it runs through January 1st. Shooting hours are always the same, starts at 9 a.m. every day and goes to sunset. So when we're talking about late season, what does that mean? For some people, that might mean once we get some snow on the ground, might be after firearm deer season, might mean after Thanksgiving. I think it's kind of a combination of all of that. If we look at the regulations, there's one date that kind of is stated there that I guess think of late season pheasant hunting, and that's December 1st. big change there. On December 1st, the daily bag limit of 2 roosters bumps up to 3. And then our possession limit also bumps up to account for that increase in the daily limit. I'll start off, we'll talk about some gear. For the most part, it might not be too different than pheasant hunting during any other time of the season. I think a couple of things that come into play is the factor of potentially snow on the ground, and just colder weather in general. So there, first thing, anybody that's familiar with, outdoor activities that time of year, dressing in layers can be extremely important. You start out in the morning, it's cold, warms up throughout the day, or once you start walking, you really start warming up. So being able to take those layers on and off as needed can lead for a lot more comfortable hunting situation. All season long, having waterproof boots is pretty handy. Lots of the areas we're ending up are damp, or in the morning the grass is just wet because of the dew on the grass. So those waterproof boots. Late season, I personally don't go to insulated boots, but if you're someone that gets cold toes, that might be something that you'd be interested in investing in. Having waterproof or water repellent pants can be extremely beneficial. Again, like that grass early in the morning can have dew, or even once it gets colder, you'll get the frost on the grass. And as you're walking through it, that's brushing off, getting your pants pretty wet in some cases. Then if you have really cold temperatures, then it'll start to freeze up again. So something that keeps either the snow, that ice, or any of the water building up on there can really help. Boot gaiters and chaps can help keep snow out of your boots if you have lower boots. If you were to go with like the knee-high neoprene or rubber boots, not quite as big of an issue. One thing we always need to remember is our hunter orange. If we're truly in late season after that December 1st and we're outside of a firearm deer season where we don't have to have orange torso and head covering, for pheasant hunting you'd only need to have one of those. So if you're someone that only wears an orange hat, one thing to remember is if you start out with a stocking cap and it gets warm and that's the only orange hat you have and you don't have an orange vest on, carrying along an orange ball cap style hat with you so you can swap out once you warm up can make that hunt a lot more enjoyable as well, so you're not overheating so quickly. The other thing is important to remember is if you have just the orange hat on, or even if you're hunting during a season where you have to have the orange hat on, if you put your hood up and that covers that orange hat, that doesn't count anymore. So if your hood isn't orange, make sure that you have a stocking cap or something if you're needing to keep your head warm during that time. One thing I always bring is eye protection, not just for shooting, but a lot of the situations we're ending up in, we're going through really thick cover, protects your eyes from getting poked from the brush and the grass and cattails. Never fun to get grass sliver or cattail and poked in the eye. It also helps if it's a snowy day or sleeting, or if you're having to walk into the wind in those cold, windy days, helps keep your eyes from watering up, because no matter what, if a rooster flushes, that's when your eyes are going to water up and you're not going to be able to see. So having a pair of either your sunglasses or I always carry a pair of sunglasses and a pair of just like clear protective glasses, because it's not always sunny enough, or if it's in lower light conditions, I don't need the sunglasses, so I just want a pair of clear protective glasses. Water can be kind of a forgotten. We don't, if it's colder out, we're maybe not getting as warm as quickly. But in some of those situations, if you're going through cattails or through thicker cover, it's warmer in those areas than it is just standing out in the open, and you're having to work pretty hard to get through some of those areas. So having water for yourself and for your dog can be really important. A lot of people don't think their dog is probably working as hard, or because it's cooler out, or there's snow on the ground, maybe they're eating snow as well. But for the most part, they're not able to get enough water just by eating that snow. So having water with for yourself and your dog is still really important, even in the late season. A couple other items that are just handy to have safety wise are a whistle. If we're going deep into some real thick cover or around cattails or wetlands, and you're hunting by yourself or even with others, having a whistle for just emergency communication can be important. Having a small first aid kit for yourself or even for your dog on you when you're hunting can prolong your hunt, prevent you from having to go all the way back to the truck to get something that you could have just had in your pack the whole time. And then I always carry, if I'm hunting with my dog, I always carry a leash with me. You never know what kind of situation you're going to get into, or you need to have like ultimate control over your dog, or even I'll kind of get into it later when we go over some strategies, but it can be beneficial for sneaking up on some spooky birds. So good thing to have. And then I think just having extra pairs of your clothing, whether it's socks, boots, pants, gloves. Obviously, you can have those in the truck. I like to have at least something to maybe change into, even if it's just for the car ride home. If my boots are wet and socks are wet and broke through the cattails, went over the boots, they filled up, I might still be able to hunt in them fine. But once I get back to the truck and I got a couple hour ride home, really nice to be able to switch out to dry clothes and not have to have a miserable car ride home. If we get into last year, this wasn't needed at all, but if maybe in a normal year, having a snow shovel can be beneficial, even if it's you pull into a spot and it's perfectly fine, you can get out, but while you're out hunting, it starts snowing, and when you get back to the truck, the snowplow went by or something and built up a berm where you're just being able to dig yourself in and out, and save you a lot of time and hassle. Now we'll jump into some of the habitat features that we might be looking to key in on during the late season. So that time of year, pheasants, just like us, are trying to find places that are warm and protective and close to food. It's getting cold outside. There might be some snow or ice on the ground, making it harder for them to find that cover and food that they would have been utilizing at the beginning of the season. Here we're looking at cattails, native woody shrubs. Think of like the old fence rows, shrub lines, hedges, shelter belts, things that contain like dogwoods, willows, plums, crab apples, serviceberries, nannyberries. A lot of them are those fruiting plants as well. So not only are they cover, they can also be a food source. Stiff stem native grasses are also utilized by pheasants. Unlike some of the other upland game birds here in Minnesota, like the ruffed grouse, where they'll utilize and roost in snow at times, pheasants are still primarily roosting in grass areas. So they still need that grass component to nest in. They're not just going to bury themselves into a snowbank or a snowdrift. And then again, ideally close to food. So if these, shrubby, fruit-bearing plants are close by, they'll utilize those. Otherwise, like your cattail wetland areas, if the closer they are to a food source, the more likely they are to be used by pheasants. So here's just a picture of kind of some of those shrubby plants I was talking about: crab apples, willows, dogwoods, nannyberry, plums. See that they're typically like multi-stemmed, grow in thicker bunches close together. low to the ground, providing that overhead and ground cover for the pheasants. And here's an example of those stick stem grasses that they're still needing to utilize for roosting. Next, I'll kind of pinpoint some target areas or areas, maybe if I'm doing some e-scouting, what I'm kind of looking for within a landscape of a property that I might key in on, or in deciding on what areas I plan to hunt. First are creeks, drainages, and ravines. I like these areas because late season, we typically probably have had some snow, can be really windy. These areas are going to be, lower elevation. They'll have steep slopes on either side of the creek or the ravine to offer protection out of the wind. The vegetation in these areas is usually pretty thick as well, because of, there's a water source. So even in dry years, these locations hopefully got enough moisture to have good vegetation growth, and they contain a lot of those brushy thicket areas, because historically they would not have been plowed up or managed quite the same as the flatter lands that are around those areas, just because they're harder to get into with equipment, or whatever reason it was, that they've just kind of been left alone a little bit more. Next one, which is probably a more popular targeted area for late season, and one that is kind of known for late season pheasant hunting, are those frozen wetland edges. Basically the cattail fringes of open water wetlands. Sometimes they can be, wetland, like the whole thing might be cattails all the way through it. I generally don't hunt those areas, just unless they're smaller where I can cover the majority of it. But those, multi-acre cattail sloughs that are just totally choked with cattails, and there's definitely birds there. They're just really, really hard to get up and get on, because they'll just keep running through there, and it's just a giant maze to work through. Hard to get birds up, and when you do, it's usually hard to get shots at them, or if you do get shots at them, to recover them. But these wetland fringes offer a little bit easier hunting, or at least ability to, if you have multiple people, you can have one on each side, or have multiple people on each side and someone walking through, or your dog's going through. Just easier to cover those types of areas. One thing we really need to be cautious of in situations like this is, in both of these, you can see, try to use the laser pointer here. There's a ditch that runs through that connects to the ditch on the side there. And on this one, there's a little inlet here. In Minnesota, a lot of our wetlands have tile drainage, or some type of drainage going on in them that will alter that. There's probably some type of flow of water, or so there's the chance of thin ice. So anytime we're talking about ice, whether it's ice fishing or hunting and stuff like this, we need to make sure that we're being smart about it and know that no ice is ever 100% safe. If you hunt in these situations enough, you're probably, you yourself or someone you're hunting with will probably experience breaking through in some of these areas, and getting wet feet is hopefully the worst of your situation. But we just need to make sure that we're cautious of the ice conditions, and that it can be very iffy in these types of situations. Next is tough to get to, or areas that were maybe previously cut off during the early season. Obviously the one on the left there, that river runs through and cuts off that northwest corner of that property. The access is, from the east side along the road there. So there's a pretty good chance that very few people have hunted on that side. So not that those birds haven't been hunted, because those birds have probably moved over into the rest of that as well. They've just become conditioned that when they fly to that area, or when they're in that area, that they're not being pressured. So if you're one of the first ones that can access that, you'll have birds that just aren't as pressured on that side, and might be able to surprise them a little bit. And being able to access that could either be because that creek is frozen up enough because it's cold enough, or just water levels are finally low enough later into the season that you can cross it. That picture on the right, we can kind of see there's that wetland cattail fringe down here that has maybe cut off that southwest corner. So late in the year, once those cattails freeze up, that might give us access to that area there now. That again, those birds probably have been hunted on the remainder of those acres, but they've just learned that in that part they haven't had any pressure. So if you can be one of the first ones over there, again, you can maybe surprise them. Next, kind of walk through a situation where if I'm doing some e-scouting, or even if I had eyes on this property and maybe hunted it early season, what I might focus on late season if I were to come back to that. And then, so kind of start, both areas outlined in the yellow and red are open to public access. First thing I would notice is, being on the ground, that this area in yellow is a newer planting of highly diverse native grasses and forbs. They're very kind of like stereotypical native CRP planting. Looks similar to this: big blue stem, little blue stem, Indian grass, switchgrass, bunch of different flower species. Really good habitat. Early season hunting definitely gets a lot of pressure. Another thing I notice is there's a little wetland area down here close to the road that has cattails, phragmites, reed canary. So these types of vegetations still really good cover for pheasants, both early and late season. But again, it's right next to the road. Anybody else that's hunting there is probably hunted it as well. Another feature on this is there's a little pollinator plot planted in the southeast corner. Again, really good cover. If you were to drive by this early season, no doubt that would be a spot to hunt. Late season, not that there aren't birds there, it's just right next to the road. The parking area is also right there next to it. It's probably been highly pressured throughout the season, so it might not be as productive as it once was earlier in the year, because birds have just become accustomed to when a truck pulls up there, people are going to get out and shoot at them. One thing that's hard to tell from the imagery here is that this big area in the middle is mostly smooth brome grass, which is this shorter grass that is really not very productive hunting wise. Most of the time birds are just moving through these areas. They're not necessarily roosting in these areas, or if it was a cold, windy day, there's definitely aren't going to be spots that birds are going to hold up at. So they're a pretty good sized area there that's kind of poor habitat. So if people are hunting this spot, my guess is they've hunted those three other points that I've pinpointed. They're easy to access, very obvious, good pheasant cover. And then maybe they've kind of ignored that bigger chunk because it just isn't very good cover. But there's one part of it that I would look at and maybe focus on late season, and that would be this northeast corner, which is made up again of wetland area. So it's cattails, phragmites, reed canary, willows, dogwoods. So that area has a brush component to it as well. So not only is it kind of further away from the road, get to it, you go through non-productive cover. So if people are looking for real quick spots to hunt, I personally feel they would pick a lot of those other spots that are close to the road, real obvious, you can see them, and maybe not work their way all the way to the back there and get into the real thick stuff. But more than likely, late season, that's where those birds are going to be at some point. Some other tips for just weary birds come late season. They've been pressured. They know what the game is, and they're not gonna just sit around and wait for you. First thing I'd say is to be stealthy. When you're pulling up, don't be slamming your car doors. Try not to talk a ton. Put your game plan together with your partners before you head out. Look over maps, tell them which way we're going to go, where you're going to meet up at out there, so that you're not having to communicate a ton as you're walking through the field. Number two, I'd say don't always park in the parking spot. Birds become educated when trucks and vehicles pull into parking areas and people and dogs start hopping out. Not that there aren't birds like around those areas, but they know as soon as you pull in there, they start getting out of the way. And maybe the parking area is like the only safe spot to pull off and park. I'd say that doesn't mean you have to start hunting right there. This is where the bringing that leash comes in hand. There's a lot of times where I'll park somewhere, leash my dog, and we'll walk all the way, down to the other end of the property if possible, or along the fence line or something before I even start hunting, so that I'm coming at birds from a different direction, or being able to work the wind correctly, and not just doing it because that's where the parking spot was. That kind of leads into my next one, is take a different path, whether that's a different path from the last time you hunted it, or if you see people hunting the spot. A lot of times, I mean, you can tell in come this time of year where the hunters have been, because there's usually a pretty good worn path, around the edges of the cattail sloughs, or along certain transitions. You can see where the other hunters have been. So I try to take a little bit slightly different path, or work in a different way that the birds maybe aren't as accustomed to. There's a handful of apps that you can have on your phone that help track your path that you're doing, which can be really handy, so that you can look back at the end of a hunt or even during your hunt and see, maybe there's a couple areas you missed, or you can compare it to the last time you were out there, so that you're taking a different path. Really handy. I have my tracker on pretty much every single hunt, just so I can kind of look back on it and reference previous hunts, or maybe I can look back at the end of the hunt and say, oh, I missed a huge portion over on this part of it, where I thought I was close to the boundary, but I was really several hundred yards off or something like that. So the next time I go out there, I know I can go even further than I was. I'd say pay attention to changes in the weather. If it's been really crappy weather for a couple of days, pheasants can go quite a while without needing to eat anything. So they'll just hunker down and wait it out. Then if we get a nice day, or even within a day, if you have snow in the morning, and then there's a break, and then snow again in the afternoon, like, pay attention to when that break might be, or when you think birds will be out moving around, or just active. Just good idea to pay attention to the weather. And kind of along with that is changes in wind direction. I would highly recommend that, whether you're hunting with a dog or without a dog, I like to hunt into the wind. With a dog, obvious reasons, that helps them scent the bird sooner. and not run over or run past birds. But without a dog, I'd say hunting into the wind helps cover your sound. We probably all experience it if you're, upwind or downwind of a train or a road, that you can hear that train or the road traffic better when the wind is blowing towards you when you're downwind versus upwind. Same thing for those pheasants. If you're walking with the wind, you'll usually experience that those birds are getting up further and further out in front of you and jumping at pretty good distances. Where if you're going into the wind, they seem to hold a little bit longer. And the only thing I can contribute to that too is that they're just not able to hear you as quickly. The other thing would be it allows you to change your path. If the wind's been blowing from the same direction for 4, 5, 6 days, and then we get a change to the totally opposite direction, anybody that's been hunting those days, if they're also following the rule of hunting into the wind, they've been hunting it in the same direction, in the same path for those 4 or 5, 6 days. To where when it switches, you can hunt it from a different direction. It kind of forces you to hunt it from a different direction. And maybe those birds haven't quite switched to that yet. So you can hopefully surprise a couple of them. And a couple of those areas we're talking about is you got to hunt the tough stuff. They're in that thick stuff on those cold, late December days. And here I would really highly recommend having multiple hunters, because you're probably going to have to send at least one person in to that thick stuff, and there's a good chance that they're not going to be able to get a shot at birds because it is so thick. So if you have multiple hunters that you can kind of post up or surround, or at least get someone to go in and chase birds out, that can help. I think something people might forget late season is like scouting, just watching. I'll pull up onto, sit at a spot where you have a good vantage point and just see if you see birds flying in from surrounding, crop fields or surrounding areas. And then like, where is it that they're flying to, or where is it they're flying from? So that maybe you can pinpoint the type of cover that they're utilizing at that day or the next day. And look, if we have snow or ice on the ground, being able to look for tracks can be really advantageous, especially if you're able to distinguish between fresh tracks and old ones. If you're just driving along the gravel road and you see a spot where there's a whole bunch of tracks crossing, pretty good chance that, and they're fresh, pretty good chance that those birds aren't too far away. So just doing your normal, scouting and observation in late season is still important. Last thing here is because late season birds have been hunted for a couple of months, they've caught on to the game. They know when you pull in that Perkins spot, they know when your dogs get let out, that they're not going to hold as long usually. So they're gonna get up further out. So we have to be prepared for longer shots. And then two of the things that most people do, or people tend to do, is they'll increase the choke of their shotgun so that their pattern is tighter further out, so that they can get a better pattern at a further distance. And then they also might increase the shot size that they're using. So if you're shooting lead shot, where early season you might be shooting 6s and like 5s and 6s, maybe you'll bump up 1 or 2 and go to 4s. If you're shooting steel early season, you might be shooting 4 or 5s, so you might bump up to 2 or 3, just so that when you do shoot a bird at that further distance, having a larger BB hopefully has enough power to knock it down that little bit further distance. Here, we just definitely need to be aware of whether you're shooting lead or steel of what land you're hunting on as well, because the federal Fish and Wildlife and reserve properties, you have to have non-toxic shots, so no lead on your person when you're on those. So make sure that you don't accidentally have one in your pocket or in your vest still. I personally just shoot steel the whole season because I'm hopping back and forth between all different properties, and I just don't want to have to put up with the hassle of making sure I got the right one and emptying out all the shells in my vest and whatsoever. And occasionally, certain properties, if I happen to jump a duck or something like that, if I'm going to shoot that, I need to have steel shot as well. So if that's something that you tend to do, make sure that you're only carrying and shooting steel shot. That kind of ends my portion of the presentation on what we're looking at for hunting wise. For anybody that's interested in if you have your own property or a friend that has a property and you're wanting to make it better for late season pheasant hunting, we have a couple of options like locally that you can go to. Pheasants Forever. We have, like myself, a number of biologists throughout the state and really throughout the country. So if you're in other states and you're wanting someone to consult with on pheasant habitat or just really any just wildlife habitat, we have the Find a Biologist page on the Pheasants Forever website, and I think the link was just posted in the chat there. Another thing here in Minnesota is we have the county soil and water conservation districts, or SWCDs. They're your local contact for a lot of habitat projects. Most of the state funded habitat programs, they're actually the local. And they can either help you directly or pinpoint the person that you need to talk to get assistance. The USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service offices are good contacts for different federal programs that might be available for habitat and program assistance. But the DNR has a lot of good information. Even like a lot of the pollinator groups like Xerces Society or Monarch Joint Venture, if you're just looking for habitat improvements, what we see, what's good for pollinators tends to be good for upland birds, tends to be good for deer, tends to be good for a whole gamut of wildlife. So all of those sources have good resources as well for habitat management. Again, my name is Aaron Wilson, Senior Farm Bill Biologist here in Minnesota for Pheasants Forever, and I think we will be opening it up for Q&A.
Okay, while we're waiting for those questions to come in, Aaron, give them a second to jot down your contact information. So when you get your pheasants, what's your favorite way to prepare them?
I just recently, so I have there's like a fajita street taco seasoning that I found that I really like. And I'll just, throw them in a plastic bag and little olive oil and dump that seasoning in there. Let it kind of marinate for a day, and then I'll just throw it on the grill. And I can cut that up and make tacos or fajitas or quesadillas, and it's great.
Yeah,
that's kind of my new one. Otherwise, I just like a little different kind of seasoning, whatever you like. And I tend to grill a lot of my pheasants. And yeah,
I guess one of our favorite ways to prepare it is to do like my wife does a really amazing wild rice soup, and sometimes she adds chicken, but if we've got some pheasants, we'll cube it up and put it in there, and that makes a really nice meal. So let's go ahead and cut down our presentation there. We got a question here from Jane. And Jane, I'm so sorry you had some technical difficulties early on there, but it appears you stuck with us, so thank you for that. What are the fees for working with a PF biologist, Jane wants to know.
so working with PF, there are no fees. So we're contracted through the USDA and NRCS. So if you were to come in and want to chat with me, there's no fee to do that. If you're just looking for consulting, if you're looking to get into a program, there'd be fees associated with that for like establishment, but a lot of those have cost share items so that you're getting reimbursed for doing those activities. But if it's just you want to, implement some practice on your and just want to know how to do that and just looking for our technical assistance, that's completely free.
Very nice. How far does your plans go? I mean, you go and take a look at their property and recommend either planting or brush removal, or you help with contractors to get rid of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so we can do, we'll go do site checks, site visits, meet with the landowner, walk their property with them, sit down, chat, figure out what their goals are, and then we can give them recommendations on, what we feel would be the best option to achieve those goals, whether it's, they're just having to do it on their own, or maybe there's some type of assistance program or conservation program through the state or federal government that can accomplish those goals. We'll usually try to find a program that does help with, cost sharing or covering the expense, because some of these activities can be expensive. So we try to have pretty good knowledge of the different options that can provide that service. But it can be, we can put together a conservation plan for you, or just give you contact information for different individuals. Most of the offices we work in, we have vendor lists for, doing seeding activities, doing tree removal, doing, burning. Really any of those things, we can typically find someone that does those services that you can at least chat with and get a better idea of what it might cost or what their ideas are.
And Paul, I didn't see your question, but we must have been thinking along the same lines, because we just kind of stumbled right into your question. But can PF help with funding some habitat rehabilitation on private land, and who are the sources for the cost sharing? So I think Aaron did a really nice job just explaining that for us. Any other questions out there? We got about 15 minutes or so left to fill up here. Anything else about pheasant hunting that you'd like to get the people excited about going out and participating? I mean, you talked about the use of steel shot, and very appreciative to that. We never know where we're going to end up or whatever, so just using steel shot is a good thing for the resources out there. It's going to protect other birds that may come in contact with that shot afterwards. So use your lead shot out at the target range, but when you get out there on your hunt, switch over to non-toxic. It's just better for everybody. And you mentioned you had a French Brittany.
Yeah.
Obie. Did you bring Obie with you today?
I don't have them with me right now, no.
Yeah. But there's something special about hunting with a bird dog when you see that dog pick up on the scent, and they go from just normal breathing to this almost vacuum cleaner, sucking that scent in and really trying to figure out what it is and where it's going. And you'll see that dog change from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail. He just becomes so excited about that smell, and sometimes it's a challenge to get him to slow down a little bit so you're not running out there in front of you. But you know, it's well worth the time if you can get a good hunting dog, and makes a great companion in the field with you. How big of groups do you normally hunt with when you go out there?
I like probably 3 people at the most, with just the way my dog hunts and kind of works. It just seems to do well with 1 to 3 people.
Yep.
I have hunted in a little bit bigger groups. What most people tend to find is, like, if you're in a big line and you got 8 to 10 people and there's 4 or 5 dogs running out there, a lot of times those dogs will start to range out a little more, and they go from one end to the next, and they never end up hunting in front of you. They're always in front of someone else then.
Oh, the traders.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just I like hunting a little bit smaller groups. Yeah. But I've seen situations where, we've had that many people before I had my dog, and I hunt with others, and we'd have a pretty good group, and all of those dogs seem to kind of work together pretty well, and didn't have any issues. But so case by case.
Jane came back with a question. Our properties in Otter Tail County. Are you the closest to Otter Tail County that she would be able to contact, or?
Nope. So we have we used to have a farm mill in Otter Tail County. He still works in conservation and works in Otter Tail County, but works for the Soil and Water Conservation District now. There, they actually, Otter Tail County itself is split into east and west for Soil and Water Conservation District, so they have a lot of resources there. We have a new farm mill in Todd County, and we have one in Douglas County. Those 2 might be the closest. But if you were to go onto that find a biologist page on the PF, that would get you could put in your address and how many miles away you want to search, and it'll pop right up with the ones that are located closest to you then.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions here. Jessica wants to know any recommendations for dog protection gear. I have 2 vests and Google trained, and on occasion Musher's Secret for paws, looking into paw shoes.
Yeah, so currently I don't use any like vests or like booties or anything like that on my dog. I think that's really dependent on like the species of or the breed of dog. I know a lot of people are starting to use vests. I guess I just haven't run into any situations yet that have concerned me enough that I need to do that, but I know they are very popular, and there's becoming more and more options available. I think there it's just finding the one that fits your dog the best is probably what you're looking for.
Very good. Our favorite viewer, Jeff, came in with a question today. Can you ask, is there a lot of focus on pollinator planting? How does that help pheasants, and does it have any food benefit for the winter?
Yeah, so there's been a pretty big push for pollinator habitat by almost all the organizations that are working on conservation, and even organizations that aren't in the conservation world. If they're realizing that pollinators are in decline, and the biggest reason for that is habitat loss. So a lot of the projects that we work on, or a lot of the conservation programs, are including some type of pollinator beneficial component to that. And for the most part, that's going to be just increased diversity of flowering plants. And then the way that benefits pheasants is when pheasant chicks, their primary food source are going to be insects. So by increasing all those flower species and just having more options there and increasing the insect pollinator populations, we're increasing that food source for pheasant chicks, but not just pheasant chicks, but any of the grassland nesting birds and lots of other organisms as well. That habitat isn't necessarily the greatest wintering habitat in years that we have a lot of snow. But being that like all those flowering species have seeds, they are definitely a food source for pheasants throughout the year. Once adult birds tend to eat the seeds and vegetation, where the chicks are eating the insects. So once they, get to this time of year, they're pretty much eating seeds. So any of those plants that are producing seeds are a potential food source for pheasants then for the rest of that year.
Mm-hmm. There was one other question that must have got put into the chat somehow. They want to know if there's any guided hunts for new hunters. Do you guys do any hunt programs through PF?
Yeah, so they're the best way to find out that would be by chapter. I should have mentioned that. So like here in Minnesota, I think we have 70 or 71 active Pheasants Forever chapters. And a lot of chapters are the ones that will host those types of events. So if you go onto the Pheasants Forever website or the Minnesota Pheasants Forever website, there'd be like an events tab. And a lot of those types of activities or events will be posted on there. So some of them do like youth hunts. Some of them will just do new hunter hunts. Some of them will do women hunts. So we have a Women on the Wings initiative. So there's a focus on getting women hunters involved, whether new or people that previously hunted and getting them back into it. So that events page is a good resource, or searching out your local chapter. Most of them have like a Facebook page. So checking in there, or just if you contacted one of we have 2 regional representatives for the state of Minnesota, Will Clayton and Chance Stewart. If you were to find their contact information, which I think would be on that Find a Biologist page as well, you can reach out to them and ask if there's any activities that they know of. They're the ones that work with the chapters to kind of help organize and plan them. So they're definitely out there, and hopefully we can do more and more of them.
As a pheasant hunter, do you use the walk-in access program quite a bit then?
I do, yes. I find that like most of those properties are quite good habitat. Most of them are enrolled into a program like CRP or some type of habitat easement, and have good upland habitat on them. So there's definitely birds on those properties. So it's just another great actually so on the map that I had, where I had the yellow outline field and the red outline field, the yellow outline field was a walk-in access property.
Okay.
The red was a state or federal property.
So let's try and recap the show just a little bit. You talked about finding a place for late season pheasants. We talked about the importance of spring food in those pollinator plots for the young chicks. We talked about finding a place to pheasant hunt as a new person and contacting a chapter. These conservation folks groups, they really work to improve the resource and to help you gain experience out there. So it's a good organization to get involved with. And if you got a shotgun and you're looking to go and walk some areas like that. I pheasant hunted by myself before I got a dog, and would kind of key off the areas that look like better habitat, not just regular grassland. And after a few flushes, you start to figure out where those birds might be hiding. And but I walked and walked and walked. It was a lot of fun. I did pick up a pheasant and a chucker one day on foot, and that was a pretty exciting day to get those two birds to. Jeff's got his fishing bucket list, and I've got my bird hunting bucket list, so I could check a couple off that day. But I appreciate you taking the time and coming in today and talking to folks about what late season pheasant hunting is like and where you go. Next week, we have episode 187, and it's on deer hunting tips and secrets. Cassie just sent me a message. We had a couple more questions, some come in, so we'll come back to that. But check out next week's show. We're going to have Jeff and I talking about deer hunting tips because we're getting close to that. It's just a matter of a few days away. So let's see here. We got if the weekend site visit question was answered verbally, I didn't hear it. Would you please repeat the answer? Thanks. So the question was, and you said it quite clearly, is you would come out, or one of the biologists would come out and do a site visit with the property owner. Is that true?
Yep.
The question was, would they come out on the weekend, or how do you schedule that? I guess what are your hours available for that?
Yeah, so typically we were working through the week, Monday through Friday, depending on what office we're in, 8 to 4, 8 to 4:30. If it's like an absolutely the only time, you live in the cities and the only time you're going to able to get out there is the weekend, I'd say there's a pretty good chance that we could schedule something and work something out to meet you on site when you are able to be there. So I would ask whoever it is in that area if they can do that, and there's a pretty good chance that we can work that out.
Well, they got your phone number, your email address. Hopefully they'll contact you with other questions as they might come up, and you can direct them towards another expert, maybe closer to where they live. But I want to thank everyone for spending the afternoon lunch hour with us today, and don't forget to check in next week's show 187 on deer hunting tips and secrets. So Cassie, we'll have you take us back to the green room. So just hang on.